started.
Okay, let's do it. Hello, everybody. Um, I'm very, very excited,
Hi.
very happy about our meeting today. So back in October, we had the first part of this. Um, it was the history of theater from the Black perspective, the history of theater through the ages from the Black perspective. And it was a wonderful conversation. We talked about theater history, we talked about Atlanta history, and we talked about what worked in the past, what was working in the present, what wasn't working in the past, what was working in wasn't working in the present. And we had a really wonderful conversation. Lots of people had comments and thoughts, and we thought that we would, based on suggestions, uh, people's need, we would have part two. So we are today going to have our part two. We are calling this, what does the ideal theater, what does ideal theater look like? And I'm very excited because I think in Atlanta, we are on the threshold of some really wonderful things. A lot of theaters in the nation shut down. Um, and Atlanta just kind of kept going in many, many ways. Um, and I think that we made, in the film industry, we made some real leaps for the nation. And I think that in theater, we have and have the potential to really move forward and have the eyes of the nation looking at us. So returning with us as moderators today, we have Gary Yates. I call him Sir Yates. Um, and Gary is an actor, a director, an instructor. He is head of the film department at Clark, Atlanta, presently, though he has um, taught in California and worked from here all the way around to the other side. So we're very happy to have you, Gary Yates. Dr. Angela Schiller could not be with us, but we are honored and to have Chandra Stevens with us today. Albright, Chandra Stevens Albright, sorry, with us today. She is the managing director at True Colors Theater Company, Kenny Leon's True Colors Theater Company. And before that has worked various corporate environments, including Coca-Cola and such. She brings her wonderful skills and insight to us today. We have Tom Jones, uh, who is a director, actor, comedian. I should have had you tell us a joke. Um, and he has his own company. He was here many years ago in Atlanta. He's an old one with us, and he knows the beginning of theater, particularly theater of color, Black theater here in Atlanta, as he was one of the founding artistic directors of Jamandi, which had a long stint and a great history here. And finally, our last panelist today is Sydney Prather. She's on here someplace. I saw her earlier. I thought she joined. And she is, I'm really excited to hear what she has to say, as she happens to be a little younger than the other folks on the panel and has a different insight than those of us who have been around for a while. Um, she has a theater company. She's the founding artistic director of the Tiny Theater Company, which did not shut down during the pandemic, but continued to produce theater to audiences. And I think she has some really wonderful insight for us today as well. So welcome to all of our panelists. welcome to all of you. And thank you so much for taking your time on a Sunday to join us, Sunday afternoon to join us for this fabulous conversation. Moderating today will be the fabulous Cherie Codwell. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Miss Codwell.
Hello, everybody. I wanted to let you know that I really am here. I'm just sitting in an airport, unfortunately. We had spring break, so the kids and I, and unfortunately, my flight plans changed and delayed, and here I'm at the airport instead of comfortably at home having this conversation with you. However, I get to still have this conversation with you, so I'm super excited about that. What I do is take myself off camera and let these speakers be highlighted as share their responses to the question that will get started off. So for all of them, and let me start with Tom, but I'm going to ask this for everybody. So we'll do Tom, Gary, Chandra, and Sydney, because I think it'll be interesting to hear their perspectives in that way. What the ideal future of Atlanta theater would look like? What would the ideal future of Atlanta theater look like? Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, yeah, sure, no pressure. I guess I'd always look at the future through the prism of African American art, because that, in fact, is, I think, what I've dedicated my life to. And I think what we have arrived at is, well, first of all, just think as a prologue and as a preface, a lot of Black institutions, more specifically in terms of Black theatrical institutions, had to change once predominantly white institutions started, opening their doors to, to African American artists. So I mean, I akin it to back when historically Black colleges and universities had a market on Black athletes. The competitive edge was, much higher. As the NCAA in Division I started recruiting Black athletes, premier Black athletes, we saw a shift in terms of the trajectory of what, HCBUs, the athletic programs were. And the same way we saw in terms of the kinds of students that now were coming into HCBUs. Once and their level of having to compete for the best and brightest of us, because doors that had traditionally and conventionally been closed were now open. I think much of what happened in terms of Atlanta theater and Atlanta Black theater more specifically, a lot of the same things happened once, and the same thing happened in terms of the Black arts movement. Once larger white institutions started opening their doors to African American artists, then we saw the trajectory of the theater change. In terms of what that means and resonates in the future, it means I think African American theaters and theaters in general, have to begin to look to what is it that they want to be in this new environment? If we're saying what does the future look like? Theaters and Black theaters are not simply competing with other theaters; they're competing with television and they're competing with film. I mean, we saw over the last year the kind of work and content that was being done by Hulu and Netflix and HBO, and from Lovecraft Country to the Fred Hampton story, to all of the kinds of content that was daring and bold and interesting and innovative and rooted in not only historical ideas but rooted in a kind of diversity of expression. It means that the best and brightest of our writers are being lured and seduced, and necessarily so, by other mediums. So what does the theater and what can the theater provide for those writers that will bring them and lure them back in longer stead into the theater? Because the future of the theater will be only as interesting and as vital as its writers. That's, theater is a literary medium. It is a medium of words. And if the best and brightest of us, if the Marcus Gardleys, if the Brandon Jacobs, if the Lynn Nottages of our traditions are being, lured into television and film, it means they have less time to devote to the theater, and therefore the theater becomes diminished in that sense. And so our job and our responsibility in looking at what the future is to create a safe haven, a home. And this is true not simply of Black theaters, but of all theaters, to create a place and a safe space where the theater becomes, they are incentivized to want to write for and be in the theater. Otherwise, we will continue to see the best and brightest of us on Netflix, on HBO. I'm watching my daughter, who's just getting ready to graduate from Yale, who is being seduced by every agent and you know and every platform in in Hollywood. I mean, she takes 3 to 4 meetings a day from everyone from Lucasfilms to Sundance on back. And I'm going, are you going to write for the theater? She said, Dad, I want to, but the carrot seems to be in television and film, and that's what's luring me. So how do we then begin to say, incentivize them to say, okay, it's not giving up the television film dream, but how else is it that you also participate in terms of creating a theater? The American theater, the modern theater, changed because of the writer, because of Chekhov. Stanislavski designed a whole means of trying to approach theater because the writer changed. Miles Davis said, my music changed 7 times because the drummer changed. The drummer in the theater is in fact the playwright. So if we can't lure them, then the future, I think, is dim at best. That becomes the big challenge. And if we can bring them, then I think what Atlanta has to do and the rest of the country is be more adventuresome, be more bold, be more risk-taking, not being risk-averse to doing the kinds of titles that on some levels, will excite and invigorate audiences, even though at best it's risky. As long as we continue to have producers and directors say things like, I'm not sure my audience can take that. I'm not sure that subject matter is, apropos for my audience, as if to presuppose, then I think we won't revitalize the theater. There won't be a future that's interesting and engaging and exciting because we haven't, in fact, engaged the best and brightest of us to come into the doors of the theater and give us the kind of content that will bring audiences there. That's a long answer, and I'm sorry for that. But
wow, no, that was amazing. That was amazing. Thank you for saying all of that. I think I had Gary up next.
Okay, ditto what Tom said. No.
I ain't mad at you,
Tom
Gary.
said a lot. Good, Tom. Thank you. You gave me a segue. It's interesting. I gave this question to a few of my students who are in theater, although I'm in the film and television area right now. And one of the things that comes up that's very important, and I do think about it often, and they raise the question, and as you respond to this particular question, what is the ideal future of Atlanta theater would look like? And one of the things that has to happen, we have to invest in our young people. We have to invest in terms of creating funding, in creating, even if they have to become, they start theater companies and they have to become, someone has to be a fiscal agent for them in order for them to develop whatever they need to develop. But we have to invest in it. I want to take you into something that is very interesting that I think this is a time to go back to, that we need to explore. And it's very, very old. I know Tom probably remember the Federal Theater Project. The Federal Theater Project, very, very important. I think this is a time to begin to explore that mechanism as well. For those of you who are not familiar with it, you might want to explore it now. Because what the Federal Theater Project mission was to address certain things that students are coming up with or young people are coming up with that we've been afraid of, and that is political theater, resist theater, cease and resist theater, and things of that nature. And when you talk about the future, you're talking about creating a pathway or a pipeline for these things to usher in. And so I would suggest using the Federal Theater Project where that mechanism where it really infused the culture and focused on them, not just the actor and plays, but on the administrative side of creating more art that would infuse and be representative of our culture at the time. It's interesting that's happening right now, and I'm going to throw in a name that everybody's going to probably, some people might go, whoa, I love Lil Nas X right now. And I'm gonna tell you why, because I work around students all the time.
I'll say it.
And I'm gonna tell you what he's doing, and I'm not all in for, but what he's doing, and this is what we're going to have to usher open the door for, that they have a voice, and they really want to be heard. And it's not like the 60s, which I grew up in, and Tom, I'm not aging you, nonviolent.
Too late, guys. It's already been done.
The nonviolent area, they're coming in with a different energy and a different esteem and all these good things. So if I to sum this up is that we have to create funding for young people to develop art. many times I go to a lot of activities in Atlanta and some other places throughout the country, and I see a bunch of old folk. And I'm saying, where the hell are the young people? Because they're our future. So when you talk about the future of Atlanta theater, you gotta think about ushering in a new generation or generations of artists.
Wow, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chandra,
Hey,
let's hear from you.
I don't want to say ditto, but amen. When I first started thinking about this question, the first thing that came to mind was something good came out of this pandemic, and that was a great sense of collaboration across theater companies. Everybody was in it together. Everybody was trying to figure out all the loans and the programs. And so there was a very collaborative sort of ecosystem. And I believe that could be a big reason why we didn't see failure to the extent we did in other markets in Atlanta. But to Tom's point, there has been sort of an audience drain and definitely an artist and playwright drain for Black theater. And one of the things that we're looking at doing is bringing some new voices in. So Jamil Jude is our new artistic director. I say new, he's been the artistic director since 2019, but he followed Kenny, who is the founding artistic director. So he's still new in those terms. And he's created this program to bring new works to the stage, so new playwrights. So, and also in the spirit of collaboration, Adai Moon is one of those playwrights, and he's over at Horizon. Gabrielle Fulton Ponder is another one of those playwrights. Trey Anthony is another one who's also been at Horizon. So we're looking at how do we continue this collaborative cohesion? How can we be more proactive about driving our audiences to other places and driving other audiences to us? The more theater people see, the more Black theater people see, the more they understand human dynamics. And that helps to reduce all the stupid we're seeing around in terms of hate and hate speech and hate behavior. So I think being able to be more proactive about getting audiences from all ilks into all the theater and kind of continuing this collaborative stance will help the future of Atlanta and theater in general.
Let me just make
thank
a
you.
reference that Adai Moon is actually now the associate artistic director at Theatrical Outfit, not Horizon.
Oh,
Mhm.
my bad.
No
I'm
worries.
sorry.
No worries.
Sydney, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. My camera's off right now.
Okay,
But I'm here.
great. All right, we would love to hear your perspective also on what the ideal future of Atlanta theater would look like.
The words coming to my head is new houses. Just a change in some sort, and with new houses, like everyone said, comes new voices, new breath, new life. And what that looks like action-wise, I'm in Shakespeare right now, so drudge and toil comes to mind. It's going to look like work. Again, going out into these places that aren't really touched physically, walking out and handing out flyers and saying, hey, this is what I got going on. And you're invited, I want you here specifically. But yeah, I just think, that's what I imagine.
Can I pick up on what Gary was saying? Because I think that,
Yes.
the sense of this new model of, in terms of, referencing the federal project, I think that's actually like spot on and brilliant, is that we have to like convene a young artist summit that's sponsored by all of the theaters. And you can't participate if you're over 25, and that what you're then doing in that summit is you're then gathering not only those writers, but you're listening to, in fact, what excites them, what invigorates them, what is it that they're interested in, and then asking them also in terms of producing some kind of festival to say, now you're responsible also for finding the audiences. You reach out to your network of folks to come in and see that, so that you're continuing, to your point, Gary, of what is the new mechanism by which we begin to, not only are we asking federal funding and private funding, but we're asking theaters to gather and say, forget what your notions are of what theater is. It's our turn to listen to what we think young voices are interested in, and allowing them not only to produce, but also to, to feature their work, but also to allow them to engage and bring audiences. Because all I hear producers saying are, they're stuck in a quandary. And I get it. My audiences have gotten older. I'm not sure they would go for, quote unquote, these adventuresome titles as much as I would like to do that. Then what you have to do is open your doors to where those audiences are going to come from. Well, it's what they did in hip hop. They didn't wait for, for somebody to give them permission to do what they did. They convened it themselves. We just have to, I think, as institutions and as theater, as institution makers, begin to open those doors and convene that kind of summit and allow them to inform us what they want to see.
And Tom, I'll support that point. With Sid is the future of theater. That's exactly what she did. Sarah, Sid, you can tell your own story, but she built her own thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yep. And you're talking, this is a tiny theater company?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I am going to visit you soon.
Hey.
I see, and I like what I see on your website and all that good stuff. And I think this is what needs to happen too, is that, and I can stay on this subject forever and ever. I'm always with young people, in that we have to make a very conscious choice to invest in these kids, in these young theaters. And one of the things that is, a lot of things have happened over the last 20 years, 15 years of my teaching students, in that they infuse my syllabus. They actually rewrite my syllabus for me for classes, because going back to something that Thomas said about students or young people, putting them in a place that they can really guide us to where they want to go. It's interesting also what happens, if you remember Lovecraft Country, the show that was on,
Mm-hmm.
and they were pulling in and throwing in all kinds of stuff, genre, and basically in my mind, it opened up a new genre. And this is what happens when you allow students to kids and young people to just go and take a hold of the rein. They'll take you into different directions and open up new possibilities and areas. And instead of us reproducing the Bertolt Brecht, the Penta, and all these other things, although those are protests and some of them are political, but I mean, we're in a different place, and we really have got to really serve them.
I agree. And Gary, I think to your point, that part of the Brechts and the Chekhovs, et cetera, that they were the incendiary voices of their time.
Right.
They only over the years became part of, kind of the classic canon. And I think Lovecraft is a perfect example. Misha Green is a beast. She is but that's the kind of voice that has to energize the theater. We have to have the Misha Greens that are sitting, in our theaters and saying, okay, you can do that in terms of content for television, what can you do here? The beautiful thing about Lovecraft is that, not many people know, is that it's based on a white science fiction writer, Lovecraft, that created the Lovecraft circles and refused at some point to deal with Black folks because of his notions of white supremacy. And Matt Kemp comes along 3 years ago, rewrites it as a novel, saying, what if we use that white this kind of thinking, what if we use systematic white racism and put Black folks in it and see what that dynamic would be? Misha Green then comes behind that, having re-envisioned what she did with her old underground, and says, now let's visualize that. That's exciting collaboration between Black and white. That's exciting collaboration, that begins to open up the doors. Where is that kind of thing happening in the theater, I think?
So I think the question that will probably be on the lips of most theater producers, though, is that right now in Atlanta, we have the majority of our audiences are retired females, really. It's the women whose children have gone off to college and they finally have time to do something, and they always loved theater and they're dragging their husbands along. And so you've got women who are 50 to 85 who are the majority of your audience, and they're the ones that have the expendable income as well, because some of them are on a fixed income, but they also have an income because when you're in your 20s, I've said this before, but when you're in your 20s, you're just mostly, you want to be creative and everything, but a lot of times it's like do I spend $35 and go to a show, or do I go to the club? You know, when you're in your 30s and 40s, you're raising your children. So it's when you're in your 50s. So how do we get those people that are 55 to 85 to want to come in and participate in this new blood information that's happening, when they're like, oh, I've been there. I'm not interested in that. I want to put my money someplace else.
You don't. You don't. I don't think you go after them. I think you don't. Yeah, I think it's a false narrative. You know, it's a false equivalence of saying, therefore we have to. I mean, that becomes the same rationale the producers have and say, my audiences, my core audiences, 50 to this mean income, etc. And they're fine, and you program to them. But to think that their expectation of those are going to be the same, that someone between 18 and 25 and 30, that they're going to have the same kind of artistic, kind of, I'm not sure that that's going to happen. So you don't worry about that. You begin to say, the reason why Hamilton became a success with older people was because the audience that it spoke to brought their aunts and uncles and folks to the theater saying, this is meaningful to me. I want you to watch this. And some loved it, some didn't. But that's how we begin to engage older audiences. If you say, I go back to convening this Young Artist Summit, let them tell us. They will bring their mother and their father and their cousins and their aunties because it's meaningful to them, and they in fact want to share their position, with, and what they care about artistically and what they're passionate about with those in their circle. The only reason why I know half the folks, some of the folks, that I ordinarily wouldn't know in music or in arts, because my daughter's 25 and she says, I want to hip you to this. What do you think of this? And so by proxy, I enter into that world. That's where I think we have to engage. To Gary's point is, where are those younger folks that we invest in that then will make the investment in developing our audiences? And some of them will be that mean and some of them won't. But what you then do is revitalize the theater with a whole new blood, a whole new energy. And that's what the future is going to be. I mean, when we built Jumanji back in '78, we didn't build it on older people. We built it on those folks that looked like us, sounded like us, and that we thought would be interested. They then found other people. The other thing that helped distinguish us early on was that we had a major writer who said, I'm going to write a piece for you as a world premiere, which then gave us a kind of cachet because we had this major writer that we were premiering that no one else in the country could. That's what I'm saying is the connection between us. We have all these artists in film and television that are here. And how do we engage them? How do you get a Misha Green to say, hey, come and write something for our theater, come produce and direct something, come create a piece for our theater, that then begins to bridge that world,
I agree with you, what you said, Tom, especially about getting those folks to invest in that summit or in those young writers. But I also think we can't afford to not address 55 to 85. I mean, that is our core. It's True Colors is probably 80% women, and most of those are over 55. And so you're right, there's going to be some level of this is not my thing. However, they're bringing their nephews and their grandkids and their next generation. So I think there's a two-way street. I think you can have the young people bring their older relatives to Hamilton, but you can also have those older relatives use theater as a way to engage them. So I think it's a both and.
Absolutely. I think I was just speaking to Brenda's point of you can't find the one play that's going to satisfy everybody.
Right.
What you have to do is begin to say the taste of someone that's 23 and maybe just out of college is probably going to be different than somebody who's 55. Why am I trying to find the one play that's going to fit all? It's right. Not a one size fit all. It's how do I begin to listen to those voices that are maybe interested in something different? And at some point, there may be some nexus, some intersection. But what we're not doing is providing a home. And I'm not saying if you have a traditional 3 or 4 play season that you're saying, okay, we have to figure out. I'm saying, how do we think outside of the box? Mm-hmm. Because we are moved from a technocratic age to a digital one. The fact that COVID only began to magnify the changes in artistic programming because we didn't have the conventional meant we started thinking outside of the box. Well, if we go back into the box once COVID ends, then I think we're going to be trapped. Mm-hmm. As someone said to me, there was a pandemic in the theater long before there was a pandemic. Of audience engagement. How are we engaging audiences that don't look, sound? How do we get out of preaching to the choir? And what COVID did was force us to consider that. I'm saying, can we now link that thinking and that strategy as an ongoing part of our artistic process and become more inclusive, even as theater artists, in listening to ways in which we can create art that's holistically different than how we did it before.
Amen.
I'll let you keep going.
No, I'm done, man.
I can go on this question, but I'm going to just sum it up, Chandra and Thomas. It's like you said, it's a two-way street. As we usher in more young people into doing the art and being receptive to giving them, not giving them, funding them or whatever, they have a responsibility as well. When I create something on campus, you have a responsibility as to do the recruitment along with myself. So and we tend to forget about that they do have that responsibility in bringing, and without even talking about it, but I think that can be made conscious to them, or not conscious, but intentional. Say, okay, I'm giving you this is what you're going to have to do. Okay, right. Build an audience that you're part of the building, not just the receiving. It's like the whole idea we're learning now more and more, pass it on. Just pass it on. Yeah.
And to your point, Gary, that happens more willingly and it's incentivized if there's ownership. Right. If I feel like I own that, if I feel like I'm just being used, come get some, then there's going to be a kind of passivity with which I approach that. But if I own it, the reason why hip hop became globalized was because they owned it. It was theirs. And they said, I'm going to be the prime, the difference was in music, it said, I'm going to be the beneficiary, the primary beneficiary of the art form I create. That was the dialectic. That's the dynamic that changed in the 80s. So you had people like Diddy and Russell Simmons and Jay-Z who said, I'm not simply going to be an artist in the music. I want to begin to own the means by which I do that. And I'm not simply going to create music, I'm going to create a culture. And it's my culture, and therefore I'm going to, so if you walk to Japan and see somebody with their hat turned backwards, that wasn't their instinct. That was that is an indigenous to Japanese culture. That's indigenous to hip hop. When you have things like FUBU, so it began to create a culture of dress, of music, of sound, of style. That's the opportunity I think we have in the theater to open to younger artists. Which is why, and they will tell us, if you can gain it, say, what does the future look like to you? What does it, and as I pose to somebody, what is your cultural Wakanda? Forget about racism, sexism, colonialism, imperialism, forget that. If you can create in a vacuum that is your own and you can do whatever it is, what does that look like in the theater? And open that possibility, I think we'd be surprised at what may come back our way.
Yes.
With your teaching, and as we're talking about the young people, are your students seeing things differently than we see them?
Yes, they are. I posed this question one of these questions to my students, and I just sat there and looked at them on my Zoom call. And when I started talking about, I'm going to sum it up, started talking about a power shift. And I went, okay, where is this going to go? And what I'm saying, we don't want other people to just hire us. We want to be placed in positions where we hire you. And I went, wow, okay. So, they're not wanting to follow the formula that has been set up for them that we're accustomed to. They want to mix genres. They want to, because they're responding to art when they have the opportunity to do it as if this might be my last chance. So they throw everything in the gumbo pot and they do that thing. And so what they're really allowing themselves to do is really challenge the status quo, challenge authority, challenge every system that exists. And they're not doing it in terms of just Black kids. They're having a conversation with people who do not look like them, and they're together galvanizing and communicating a different way they want to live and do art. And it has no barrier. That's what they're saying. But they're saying do not hold me hostage to these formulas and these, well, the formulas of the way we've been doing things. There's something else that came up in my conversation with them. I do have notes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can't think of it now. I didn't write that particular note down, but yes, they are concerned. We started talking, one of my students started talking about cease and resist plays. I'm like, whoa, wait, come on. And that's an education I love. And basically they gave it that particular title because they're focusing on policing. And I'm like, oh, okay. So we have to be okay with being ushered into new areas. And it's not their fear. And some of the fears that I always tell people push back because they don't want to go into new territory. And I said, nah, not true. People don't push back because they don't want to go to new territory. Sometimes people push back because they're being exposed. And and then my own fears came. I'm like, whoa, okay. So you have to allow them to breathe and do what they do and mix what they, and move all the borders and boundaries and everything. Just let them go. Because I've seen some really exceptional conversations and art created. And Lovecraft is where their brains are more than any place.
Yeah, and I think even more, you let them go even in terms of marketing. You know, the ways in which we begin to speak to bringing in audiences. You know, there's a sense that they have a line on that digital footprint that's quite different than, you know, a lot of old heads who are looking. And so even the means by which they want to communicate it to, you know, to their constituencies and their communities, you know, are very, very different. It used to be that the theater led television and film, that it was the innovator. It was the place where innovation happened. That's my fear, is that that's not what's happening anymore. I mean, even to your point about Lovecraft and those other, that we are looking in other forms that are fun, that's now leading us. And so therefore the theater is in a certain sense is following artistic traditions being challenged by younger artists rather than leading it. And that's, if that continues to happen, then what is the incentive to come to the theater? You know,
right,
okay, no, go.
But it's interesting too. It's interesting too, as a teacher, it's interesting too how it has their vision or what their how they view their perspective has even affecting how I'm teaching them acting. In terms of really creating more room for them to be creative. They're doing some very, very interesting things. I'm not going to go into detail about it, but it has affected a lot of areas in theater and the technical part as well in terms of how they communicate it. They're more versed in technology, and then, you know, I teach a portfolio class and they just blew me out of the water with all the different softwares, and some incredible creative documents that we created to support their particular arts. One of the key things that we're trying to teach students now, and they have demanded that we do, is in everything that they do, they want to be taught entrepreneurship. They don't want to work for nobody. They want to create their own, and you have to be able to receive them in that way. That they don't want to be, they want to lead, and that's a good thing. So we have to create more room, even in academia, for them to lead. Even going back to my classes, even in what I put in my syllabus, there's a point what it's called flipped classes, basically. What is it that you want to learn? What is it? And they tell me, and I have to put it in there. And then I have to go and study. And it's like, damn, okay.
And the other side of it is that they want to forfeit that not-for-profit model in a certain sense, because they look at it as deficit spending, as something not making money. So to your point, when they start talking about entrepreneurship, they're talking Jay-Z entrepreneurship. You know, they're talking Beyonce entrepreneurship. You know, they're talking Oprah entrepreneurship. They're not talking, you know, theater entrepreneurship, which is in a certain sense built on this idea of begging other people for some money. You know, begging other people, which is again another way of saying I need somebody else to give permission for me to do what it is that I do, as opposed to I'm creating means and I'm creating relationships and alliances with other folks that allows me to do more of what I want to do. But if all of that went away from ground zero, I've already monetized my value and my worth in my art, and I'm able to do it in the way that that those, aforementioned entrepreneurs and artists that we mentioned. The other side of it is that we also have to do some trauma work. We have yet to deal with the trauma of colonialism and how it puts itself in there. We have yet to deal with the trauma of racism and sexism and homophobia. That's trauma work that we haven't done with young artists to free them to begin creating a kind of work, which is why the work that they're seeing in them is explosive. But we have to create those venues for them to be able to do that kind of work so that the work in the future is reflective of this new paradigm.
I'm in texting Sid because she's doing this, and I don't know why you're so quiet, so I'm gonna call you out. So
I'm actually a really quiet person. I really don't talk much in public.
Well, I mean, you're doing this, Sid. You create your own theater company. You're about to be under the tent at the Alliance Theater in front of a whole new audience of people. I think we will all benefit. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but you are the future we're talking about.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I have been listening. And I do agree with you, Mr. Yates. I'm a teacher as well. And I went in not knowing, and I had to learn that same thing, like asking the kids, oh, what do you want to learn? And kind of, so I was snapping over here. But yes.
So Sid, you're on the panel because we want to hear from you. I know you're a quiet person, but we really wanted you to be on the panel so that we could hear from someone who was out there doing exactly what these other panelists are talking about. And so we'd love to hear your perspective of what the future looks like.
How did you make Tiny Theater come to life?
I think it's awesome.
I wanted to, I typed in cheap studio spaces on Google, and I clicked the first one that popped up. And I was living at home. So all the money, I was working at Synchronicity at the time. And I wanted to use their space, and I reached out because I just wanted to see something Black. I just wanted to see Black people on stage, because to college I didn't. And then I came to Atlanta and I didn't really see it, or if I did, it was, it was like the play you would see at school, or history plays. And I wanted to see something more just what I wanted to see, essentially. And the cheapest space I could find was $500. So it was like a closet, and I built a little stage. My mom's friend was a carpenter. I used to babysit her kids, so she helped me build a stage. My mom sewed the curtains. And yeah, I really never imagined it going here. It wasn't even a Black theater when I started. I just wanted to do it, and
Tell me, what was the first play? What was the first play that you did?
The first play I did was Romeo and Juliet, because Shakespeare was free, and I could adapt it. I didn't, that was one less thing I had to worry about, because, I'm a Capricorn. That means stuff to people, but I don't ask for help. I grew up, so I don't ask for money. I don't ask people, I ask my mom. That's it.
Can I jump in really quickly?
Sure, man. Go, Gary.
So this, Sid, what I'm hearing is awesome. I'm gonna tell you why it's awesome. And I was thinking, as you were talking, I said, I would love to be a part of bringing you virtually, or we're not on campus yet, virtually, to talk to theater students about opening their own theater and starting their own theater. What I heard you talk about is something very strategic, even in the selecting of the plays, and not being discouraged about the lack of money and things like that. So I want to be responsible, and Brenda know I'm good for my word, and I love my young people. I want to be responsible in helping you put your voice out there a little bit louder to other young people who I do have discussions with and conversation with regarding wanting to start a theater. And you can talk about the ups and downs of doing that. And I'll go even further. I will help you write out the outline in which you would present it. So I'm going to give you my number, and I want you to call me. And if you don't call me, I'm gonna come by and do a drive-by at your house. Okay?
Where to find you.
You know what I think is really interesting too, Sid, is that we are sitting here talking about finding new voices and saying new things. And yet you took Shakespeare and you're doing a whole series of Shakespeare, which has been done for hundreds of years, and you're giving it a new life, a facelift. And you are getting young people who would normally go, "Oh, Shakespeare, oh, I don't know, I don't want to go to that. That's old fashioned." You're getting them to come out and see this, archaic theater, and they're going out around and talking about it. They're excited about it, and so I think our other panelists are correct in that you and your generation are our future, because you can put spins on things, even those old things, and make them come alive.
Yeah.
Because it's about, as Tom said, theater being alive and leading, and theater's always been alive.
Exactly.
And
And I would just I'll co-sign what Gary said. In any way, shape, or form that I can be a resource, whatever that means, in terms of you said and time, whatever that may look like and mean to you, please don't hesitate to call. Like I said, I'll give you the number as well. Don't hesitate. Not that you need that, but in the event that you do, just know that, that's part of what the tradition and the continuation of the tradition is.
And Thomas is right, part of tradition. I mean, we've not really thought about this, but this is what we have to do. This is what we were taught to do. Nobody stood in front of us and said, you have to. Now we have to tell young people that, but we just know we have to. I just put my number in the chat so the world has it.
Right. So when you get all these other calls from other people, don't worry.
me too.
I know how to block anybody. Ask my students.
My number wasn't for you.
I was gonna, Sid, I don't know if you're feeling better, but she's doing an alliance production. There's a tent set up out on the Sifley Plaza out at 1280 Peachtree in the middle of Midtown with all the millionaires. And Sydney's play is gonna be under that tent.
That's beautiful.
I mean,
make sure that the white people don't pimp you. So that's just coming from an old head.
No,
Also,
But I'm putting back on my teacher hat right now, and this is my teacher and counseling hat. Thomas, you didn't know that, did you?
No, I knew. Okay. Go ahead, guy. I've always been
and this might be for all us grown folk on here. This might be revealing something to us about young people being afraid to approach us or come to us about what they need. So it might be something that we need to think about and do.
Yeah.
That make them okay with expressing their ideas and coming to us and sharing their visions and thoughts, and not thinking that what they're doing and what they're experiencing is weird and crazy. That it is very, I said enough, that's all.
No, I think you're right. And I think it goes back to that idea of that summit, that at some point in time, the convening of minds, and the other side, and I don't say pimping you lightly. The reason why the Alliance is opening up for tenants because they have quantified your value. I just want to make sure you've quantified your own and that you understand the value that you're bringing to them. That it's not again, we are not in this paternalistic kind of world where it's like, oh, wow, the white folks like us.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
You better say it.
She said, you better say it.
Right.
Okay. Chandra, with the reality of all the tensions that have happened around, in theater, let's say in Atlanta theater, how does that affect your plans as the managing director there at True Colors?
Plans is a interesting word, right? Because you can't do it. So we've learned to be very flexible. We've learned to think out ahead of where we think we were. I think, Tom, you said the model's broken. It's a scare. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you were talking about this deficit sort of model, and we're having to break all of that. We're having to break the model. So we're looking at, you know, just in time programming. We're looking at how do we talk to our audiences differently? How do we do that both and with Miss Lisa and then young Z, how do we have that conversation? So we're basically rethinking everything, and we have a very short, planning horizon. We think it up, do it, think of the next thing, do it. But at the same time, we thought this was an excellent time to go into a 5-year strategic plan, because if there's any time to figure out what the heck you want to be when you grow up, it's in the middle of when everything is broken down, because you can build it from scratch. So that we're doing the short term from a programming standpoint. We're doing the long view from the brand standpoint.
Nice.
I think you said a really important thing, because planning is hard at this point when you don't know when and if theater audiences will be there, when they'll come back, if they'll come back, will they come back virtually? Will they come back in person? And all of these other things that we've been talking about so early. So I think that plans is a hard word to talk about, which goes back to Gary and Tom talking about finding out from others because it's hard to plan. If I can plan a party, but if nobody comes because they don't want to be at that party, then okay, you're going to take me back to, I'm going to need Gary's counseling, right?
Yeah, you got to call me to see what I want to eat.
Right, exactly.
That's exactly right.
So you gonna eat what I got. Okay, that's another thing.
But you know your family, right? You know your family, you know your patrons, your donors, your students, you know them. That's not the hard part. It is challenging to make sure everybody feels safe, but the hard part is all the external factors, like what's the COVID rate doing? What's the union gonna let you do? Can you afford to do what the union's gonna let you do? Are the venues ready? There's a lot of scraping and cleaning and spraying and, all the stuff that has to happen. So it's the family I feel pretty good about. I know them. I can reach out and say, are you still a vegan? Do you like to sit on the aisle? But, the union and the government and the medical situation and all that, those things are really what makes it tough.
This is a good time for amphitheater. Exactly. That's what it is.
That's what, yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And hope it don't get too hot.
Well, they have the mist fans that work. You'll be okay.
Right. They have them in Vegas when you walk down the streets. All the hotels make sure that they mist you. They know it's 120 degrees in the shade.
Import some technology and make sure we don't mess up Miss Lisa's hair. But I'm all for it.
So in general, we've talked about the need for including the younger voices, to include the younger people, their ideas, and moving forward. How do we think in, let's say September, maybe most of the theaters will, September, October, let's say, how do you think Atlanta lines up with opening up and moving forward, whatever that means, with theater? What will theater look like in Atlanta? What do we need to do so that theater in Atlanta is open and inclusive and trend setting?
One of the things that's been a silver lining in all this crazy is that I mentioned is this collaboration across theaters, and we've put each other's shows in our playbooks, and we've shared email lists and all that. But I think for this thing to really make a difference and us to come out on another side, and Tom, you talked about breaking the box, is we have to be a lot more proactive about getting other people's audiences into our house and our audiences into other people's houses, and really being like, we want people from Alliance to come see True Colors theaters. We want people from Theatrical Outfit to see Horizon work. We want people from, I think the more we can create this audience that doesn't see this is their theater and this is their theater, and the more people get the quantity and quality of great work we have, I think that's really a way we have a break in the model. Because it's like an adventure to come to SWAC. Really? Come on. It's not. So it's like, let's get people out and about and experiencing what we're all doing. That's why I'm so thrilled that Sid's going to be under that tent. This is giving her an audience that she would not have before, and now those people will come see her.
Well, I think you said something that's really nice, because I think that Atlanta theater really did buckle down and support each other. When it wasn't about, I'm going to try to get the funds, but I am going to try to get the funds, but here's the information so you can get some funds too. I think the theaters in Atlanta really were supportive in a way that may or may not happen across the country. I don't know, but I was very happy to know that I was part of the committee. The community here. I see a hand. I think it's a pretty good time for us to go into some questions from the audience. And I know that Kate has been keeping track of some of the stuff in chat. Robert Connor, you have a question, a comment, a concern, or something?
I just want to say, I want to echo what all of the great panelists had to say about the collaboration. I think, not to be too historical, but the thing about especially African Americans in times of challenges, we tend to galvanize and come together, and it's great to see that even go beyond African American theater companies. But I think one thing that was unearthed during the pandemic, even for me, who actually runs a for-profit theater company, was the disparity in funding, and the the truth behind the veil. And I think that as theater makers, Black, white, or otherwise, we all need to galvanize to, one, level that playing field, to call to task, to not let the organizations and the funders off the hook in regards to the value of equitable funding, not just for African American theater companies for sure, considering we are, over half of the population here, but for also young theater makers, new theater makers, all of those things. And when the data ran and we found how much of a disparity it was a shock to me. But, I'm kind of new to the game. So I think that we do not need to stop having conversations, but then also taking action and finding how to see tangible, long-standing evidence that funding will be more equitable for all people who are trying to be connoisseurs or, theater makers in Atlanta. That's my 2 cents. I'm sticking to it.
No, I think that's a great point. If I kind of follow, it's the longer you live, the longer you realize that argument we've had throughout the 20th century and now into the 21st century. And I think it really speaks to how is it that we just re-energize funding models. Asking, the idea of dismantling white privilege and systematic white racism, which always is fueled by money, is a long-term proposition. And so, yes, I think you have to keep the pressures on. But I think what dismantles that more quickly is to create models by which you can fund what it is you're doing in ways that it hasn't. I mean, Tyler Perry created an amazing business model that wasn't contingent upon the generosity of strangers. How do we mimic that? How do we look at that and say, he created $1 billion industry around his art in a very particular way. I remember getting Tyler's first play and looking at him and laughing and saying, man, this ain't really ever gonna work because yada, yada, yada. He said, okay, watch me. And, 10 years later, so we're still, as opposed to being Don Quixote and chasing windmills, which I think you do have to continue to apply the pressure of disproportionate funding in the community. At the same time, on a parallel track, as August would say, 2 trains running, has to be how we invent new strategic funding models so that we are not always reliant on the generosity of strangers, that we can't continue to be the Blanche Dubois, and rely on the generosity of strangers. Although when we first came up, there was something in the National Endowment called expansion arts. which then began to deal with how you had populist, but it came out of the pressure of folks, how the populist notions of how you fund community organizations outside of this kind of traditional model. So organizations and theaters were getting 30 and 40 and 50 and $60,000 to reinvest in their community. Well, you know, as true to form, Republicans come and say, no, we want that money to be diverted to other things. We want tax breaks for the rich. And so there's always going to be this struggle and this tug of war between those who want access to the monies that you would, in fact, would say should be dedicated to more populist notions. The only way we combat that is not only through activism and advocacy, but also by creating strategic funding models that don't resemble the traditional model.
Right. Chandra, go ahead.
I was going to say allyship is important here too. If you look at the stats on individual giving for Black theaters or theaters of color, 6% of money that comes from contributions is from people. If you look at predominantly white institutions, 60% of money that's contributed comes from people. And you can say there's a generational wealth issue here. But there's also an opportunity to say, well, we don't have generational wealth, so we just can't expect to have individuals. No, that's what allyship is all about. Invest at those levels. It's less about the generosity of strangers, but turning these strangers into allies. If you give this predominantly white theater over here $5,000 and you give True Colors $100, let's talk about that. What's up with that? You know, why is there this disparity in investment? How are you supporting this inequity by your choices in investment? Do you not understand the work? Come see the work. That goes back to come see the work.
Yeah, I agree. But and it's not a counter argument, I totally agree, is as we put the efforts to turn that 6% into a 60, they're also, understand, are we not also investing in other kind of strategic possibilities of revenue and generating, because that 6 may never become 60. The other thing is that we should never underestimate what systematic racism is. It's called systematic for a reason, that it's hardwired into the very DNA of how choices and decisions are being made. And if we also aren't there, conscious people there, in those places where those decisions are being made, we will always be reactive as opposed to be proactive.
Exactly. You got to be inside the machine snipping those wires.
Got to be in the room.
And earlier we were talking about changing the models for young people and relationships and alliance and all this good stuff. But you're absolutely right, Rob. He's gone, Robert. In that's a good question. In that we have to, as Thomas mentioned, change the models that we're using for funding as well. Now, very specifically, as I go into funding, say the area that I'm in, they specifically ask you to be funding a grant that was just wide open at a particular time in history. Now it's very specific. They want you can get money if you're going to focus on human rights issues. You're going to get money if you focus on trafficking. You're going to get money so we have to be very intentional and very specific. And that's the conversation we can have. And that would help with the playing ground too, that people are focusing on particular things that actually draws money to them. Because when you look at it in all the theaters, we all have different things that we're good at doing. And everybody doesn't do the same thing. So if that makes sense.
It's also the same thing that we saw HCBUs battle, that the endowments that happen at Harvard and Princeton and Yale are very different than the endowments that happen at Morehouse, Spelman and Howard. And so that had to be addressed as well. Are we ever going to have the $30 billion endowment? Maybe not, but then what then are other kinds of strategies by which that we can get that? And so I think we have to
identify what we do bring to the table. I understand your question, Connor. And very good question.
And where's the strategic minds that work from that business world? How do we engage them in terms of looking at the arts model?
Chandra comes straight from business models. I think she should spearhead that committee.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And engage those minds that begin to say, those minds and strategists that can come and look at our institutions through different eyes.
Right.
You get lost and seduced in the traditional ways in which you run a theater. And so you start getting, the hamster wheel, get on that hamster wheel of running it that way. And other people may come with a different mindset and go, have you considered this, that, and the other thing? That there are ways in which we can fund that has nothing whatsoever to do with the ways in which you're going at it. Continue that. But now let's build some alternative strategic models that may also assist in your own fund development.
Yeah, I mean, my contribution is Sid is helping her build her board.
Okay.
There you go. But I want to open it up for other questions. And I know that there was at least one comment or two in the chat that Kate may want to share.
Perfect. And I think this kind of ties in perfectly. And this was from D. Moore of, since Georgia is 48th or something in arts funding per capita, is there a way to create a lobbying body to push for more funding? Is that a part of creating a different strategy or a different approach?
Well, there are those lobbying efforts do exist. And there are, and I think a lot of theater producers have been really proactive in terms of creating that lobbying effort. It really goes back to the synergy of voting and what, when you look at what the arts endowment is in this country nationally, it is like 1000% of what the Pentagon budget is. So there is a sense of what is the priority in this country when it comes to art. And that's it's less to do with just the lobbying efforts, which I think the Atlanta theater leaders have been really, really diligent and really active in terms of making that happen. Now we're addressing a larger question of how art is viewed in this country, and how it is that we begin to move that conversation in terms of our national leaders of saying there needs to be, even within the endowment, opening it back up, opening the humanities up, so that we begin to approach funding the arts in a completely different. That's a really large conversation, and it also starts with the vote.
Georgia's, I think, either 49 or 50. I think it's 49 in arts funding per capita in the country. So you look at that tiny number for the country and then shrink it down even more.
Exactly, which tells you what they care about. Mm-hmm. Which also is indicative of how we have to begin to deal with, not competing for the little bit of money that's there already. Mm-hmm. But also, beginning to open up different strategies of fund development, because as you're saying, if you're 48th or 49th in total funding, how you keep slicing the pie thinner and thinner and thinner. And so the people who are trying to go after that money, in a certain sense, cannibalize each other trying to get that, And so sometimes the question is not whether, the Alliance gets 30,000 and we get 3, it's how come they're only getting 30,000 and we get 3? Why isn't there 300,000 of which we're all getting 150? I mean, that you begin to say, how do you can increase the margins? Because there has to be some national mandate on what art is in its community and why it's important. That was the conversation in the 60s, which is why the funding model changed significantly, why there was a creation of the National Endowment for the Arts, why there was a creation in Atlanta of the Department of Cultural Affairs, why there was, there was a synergy in terms of art being at the center of community development, which is why the funding agencies changed and were developed to support that. That's the conversation on a larger community level that we have to get back to, so that we're not asking people to just give more money. We're asking them to change their whole notion of why money is given to the arts in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. We have another question. I'm not sure who this is intended for, so we'll call this round robin. In the past, many theaters have had volunteer internships. How will it change the picture if all theaters are doing paid internships and being encouraged and encouraging to mentor individuals for further career progressions?
Shonda, you can take that one.
Yeah, thank you. We actually had paid internships.
That conversation.
Yeah, right. We had paid internships in 2019, and the pandemic made that impossible. We were doing it with 4 other theater companies called 4 Directions, coined by our director of education, Nikki Toombs. It was great because these are postgraduate. They were learning from 4 very different theaters. Sid was an intern with True Colors. Our internships are unpaid. And for us, it's a matter of having the funding, having the support to pay interns. We want to pay everybody. And we just, it's a function of, do we not have anyone in because we can't pay them, or do we have people in and expose them to opportunities that will help them get fruitful professional experience? I think that would be a model changer. If we had paid internships, I think that would be a model breaker. Model break. We want to break the model. But right now it's a function of where do you have the money to do it? Someone asked me, what would you want? What would you want if you could have anything you want? I'm talking to somebody who's asking what True Colors wants. I'm like, we want an endowment. We want to endow our education program, because that's the next generation. So here, I'm not going to ask you for $100 or $500. If I don't know who you are, but if you can afford to endow our program, then let's keep talking. And I'm gonna start that at that and then work my way down.
And just to your point, it's not just simply endowing just an education program. I mean, that's why they called it the National Endowment for the Arts, but that there was this overriding, understanding that that there was a part of the arts that had to be endowed. I mean, it's the same thing Memorial Arts Center operates under, that the institutions that operate under that know that they're endowed, that they know at a certain point in time, they have a tremendous amount of room, to operate and fund, because every year they know there's going to be a certain allotment that comes to them just because they're under that umbrella, and I think those are, again, some of the models that we look like.
Yeah, I mean, you can take artistic risk if you're endowed, right? Because you can afford to take a hit.
Well, yes, except that they're not risky.
Oh yeah, they can.
That doesn't necessarily preclude that. I think hopefully it can lead to that, but what the nature of that endowment is. When we look at all of these athletes that have foundations, how is it that we now start having conversations with athletes, and saying, hey, did you ever think of the arts as a foundation? As we begin to think about all of these, these hip hop artists that have foundations, and how do we convene those conversations with those outside of our traditional funders and say, have we considered this? And this is what the benefit is. Can we have, again, a summit, a conversation that begins to consider what endowment looks like, in the same way that we're now beginning to have conversations about what African-American generational wealth looks like? Can we tie those two together in a way that expands the conversation so that people are thinking that that's part of their modality, that, oh, right, this is what arts means. This is how it is an economic generator. This, all those other things that we say to ourselves and to our smaller circles. How do we expand that conversation in a larger context?
Amen.
Hey, Sandra, you said something that really resonated in me when you said, when you have endowment, you can take artistic risk, which is really the challenge that many smaller theater companies or production, the desire to take artistic risk. However, you need endowment. The other thing that I just want to touch upon in regards to internships, because I wholeheartedly feel like that internships and training are so critical, not just for the immediate benefit of young people learning, but also to populate and to build a force of young people, specifically of color, that can help even get into those rooms to start changing the conversations as well. What I find, because many of you who know me have one foot working in formal education and one foot in professional productions, that I find that there is a huge gap in regards to exposure and training with young Black, young brown people. They are just not gatewayed into this field. And so by happenstance or through relationships, they get there. But I think that we could create, even within our smaller circle, an allyship that would help kind of create a network of internship opportunities. And I would love to talk to anybody because, I have a nonprofit called Dominion Arts Foundation, and one of its main purposes is to create a platform of opportunities for young people and older people who want access to arts and entertainment. So that's my 2 cents. I'm sticking to it.
Okay, we have approximately 5 minutes or so before I need to turn it over to Kate to talk about what's coming up next. So I want to be able to take those questions if you have them.
Yes. What do you all think is the most important thing our established Atlanta companies can do to move our whole industry more toward the ideal of inclusivity and equitable production?
Uh-oh.
Okay, y'all don't get to palm this one off on me this time.
I think that step, as a result of George Floyd, is probably already happening. That if you look not only in Atlanta and around the country, that there are more people of color that will become artistic associates and directors and producing directors, et cetera. That they're, I don't know of a theater company, major or minor, at this point that hasn't, hired a person of color as the wingman or wingwoman of their theaters. So I think that in and of itself will happen. And the result we'll have to see over a couple of years as to what that impact is. Whether it's Kenny at Roundabout or a Dai at Theatrical Outfit or Sheldon at Ford Theater. I mean, that's already happening as kind of this national mandate that's come as a result of the racial awakening of the summer. The next question is, what does that look like in terms of the risk? Are they still going to be risk averse to the kind of programming that will invigorate and excite audiences? It's always going to come back to that. It's the same thing we talked about, doing Romeo and Juliet in a different way. I mean, if you just do it and put some Black folks in it, is that going to make it any more exciting and engaging to people? If you do it in a way that speaks to them specifically, that will begin to engage. Will the menu of work that people do stop making excuses for not taking a risk? And can those people of color force that? And that, I think, ultimately is where we're looking at. Will the theater in Atlanta become, I have artists, writers that tell me, I can't come to Atlanta and write because the theaters won't support what I do. And I go like, wow, okay, I get you. I get you. And I know just from my own conversations with producers and saying, what about this? And they go, And I go like, oh, now I understand what the writer hears. Now I understand what they're saying. Because when I lobby for their work at different theaters, you don't get an endorsement of it. And yet that work may be being done in other places and may be being done in other places where it's having a receptivity. So we have to be really careful in our messaging to artists and writers outside of this community, because their view of who we are and our view of who we are aren't necessarily in sync. Their view is that we are reactive, that we are in Bible Belt, that we won't take a risk, and that there's no place for them.
Right.
That's their view outside of this community. Our community doesn't view it that way. And there is something where if we can bridge that gap, I think the future will be bright. But we have to be really honest and clear with what's going on in terms of the ecology of the American theater and Atlanta and its place in it.
I think there's, I love that. And I think I'm a big, as I've said 100 times today, collaboration. But I think part of that collaboration, to your point, Tom, is outside of Atlanta. So TCG, the national organization that supports the American theater, having more Atlanta voices involved in speaking out to theaters around the country about what we're doing, helping to dispel that notion, is just one thing I can think of. And I don't know, I mean, maybe even co-productions across the country.
I think that's helpful. And I think we also have to convene those writers who feel that way.
Yeah.
And say, because they're really having that conversation amongst themselves. And I'm talking about all of those writers that are coming out of NYU and coming out of Yale and coming out of Iowa and coming out, and are coming out of USC, who are having conversations and say, nah, I'm going what about coming to Atlanta? And they, nah, I think I'm going to go to LA, or nah, I think we're going to Chicago, or because they view that there's a receptivity, that it may be important for artistic leaders to say, okay, wait a minute, let's recalibrate. Let's begin to open our doors and have a conversation, because there's a perception about who we are that I'm not sure we've embraced and understand.
Yeah.
That may need to break some of those walls down.
I'm going to plug Jamil. Jamil has created this program with the Lorraine Hansberry Center in Seattle called the Drinking Gourd. Mm-hmm. And the intent is to put new playwriters' work into the pipeline, read it, develop it, workshop it, and then eventually world premiere it around the country in Black theaters. And so I think that's one way to sort of get these voices, their work in the pipeline. So I say that because to the extent you can share those names, or you and Jamil can talk, there may be between Seattle and Atlanta an opportunity to get some work.
And also there's the woman, not named, that deals with the new program development, new play development at Sundance, is a Black woman.
Oh, wow.
Yep. And so there needs to, who's also, that
No.
was one of the conversations that I had that she had with one of the writers that said, yeah, they would, why don't you do this in Atlanta? And one of the writers said, yeah, but they won't do my work. You know what I mean? So it's interesting that we may be able to begin to advance those conversations, particularly because she's sensitive to all the stuff that's coming in.
Oh, we'll do it.
But,
Very interesting.
Offline, I was saying who that is.
And I think all of this connects back to you mentioning, Thomas, about people not feeling comfortable and coming here and doing their art, going to other places like Chicago, etc. And I think it also connects to that idea connects with what Chandra was saying about, you give us enough money, we can do it. We don't have any, we won't get any flack. So I'm always looking for a solution. So if I heard Chandra mention something about allies. I think it would be a good idea if all the theater companies, those who will, get together and become allies in approaching people who do not normally fund groups of people. Something happened recently and blew my mind that General Motors came to the film department looking to give money. I'm like, oh, well, what do we have to do with GM? And they said, well, we need people to film the cars. We need people to write the reviews about the car. We're like, oh, so that got me to thinking outside of the box. And I think we need to, those persons, like for example, those particular plays that people are reticent in doing here in Atlanta, get that community of people who have money to give to that particular organization in order that creates a platform and funding for that to occur.
Also give them institutional cover, that if in fact it's the Center Theater Group in LA that's bringing yada, 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 it sometimes gives the institutional cover of saying that, okay, we're to your point, Chandra, that, we're doing these co-pros with these folks that give us the opportunity to do work. And it has much more cachet because it's just not us out there on the limb trying to take the risk.
Right.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. And there's a lot of money out there. I found, and it's interesting, and I found it out during the pandemic, when people, and during this whole period of diversity and inclusion, and everybody's just knocking down the door and coming from all crazy places, but we're not doing it alone. We're doing it as a group. For example, and I have to use examples, like I would go and try to get funding or grant by myself in this particular department. Now they're asking us, okay, would you bring psychology and business in together? Could you create allies together? And then you get more money. And so that's basically what I'm saying here, bringing in more different types of theater companies together, and you all can do that collectively.
And can we use our HCBUs as cover as well? That we can do a kind of, thing that happens as this educational initiative or a project, et cetera. I remember Emory did that piece called Neighbors, Brandon Jacobs' piece, which takes place in blackface that nobody in the country will do. Powerful piece, right? Nick's called it. And Emory did it, and therefore it had cover, so that Black artists could do it, and we could raise it as incendiary as it was, and the theater not being a casualty of doing something that their audience may react to. And it was done as a humanities project. So there are ways in which, and if those kinds of things, we continue to create those kinds of relationships that you said, Chandra, these allies and these allied programs, and as you talked about, Gary, then we're not then going to be risk averse. We've created means by which we protect the institution, but we also then engage and open up to the writer and can then say to the woman at Sundance, no, fear not, we have X, Y, and Z. We can say this theater group, Center Theater Group, no, we can do that.
So Chandra, you can take the stand. I didn't do it. They did it. Right. They gave me the money to do it. I didn't do it.
But we are at our time. In fact, we're a few minutes over.
Oh,
so
Brenda.
I don't mind continuing. I know, Gary. I don't mind continuing this conversation, but there are some people who may need to leave. And so I'd love to thank our panelists for being here today. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Chandra. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Sid, for the information, the fabulous conversation about us moving forward. I don't mind the staying on afterwards. I don't know what our host has, but I think these conversations can continue even after we leave here. Please, please, please continue them. Gary, I'll get your hand in a minute, just before we leave. But I do need to turn this over to Kate,
Sure.
who will tell us some other wonderful things.
Well, I echo Brenda's thanks to all of our panelists. You know, it's a great conversation when you see one of the panelists go, ooh, and have to write something down. You know, it's rich. Then, so this has just been a fantastic conversation. And thank you, Brenda. And thanks to Cherie as well. We lost Cherie. She had to go, but she shared all of her questions with us. So thanks to her. And thanks to all of our Suzi judges and members for your time, for being here, and for listening in. We are moving forward. We do need to schedule our next section of Suzi Salons. Brenda and I talked about, we're going to get probably a survey out to everyone, just to get some suggestions for topics and ideas and some questions that you may have, so that we can start folding that into the programming that we set next. We do have our next membership meeting coming up. It will be May 19th. We don't have the registration link set up yet, but just a heads up. So more info on that. And that, I think, is all we have for now, other than thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brenda. Thank you,
very
Suzi Salon.
Thank
And thank
you.
you for bringing really smart and vital and interesting people into this conversation. I always learn so much from this kind of discourse. And, Gary, Chandra, Sid, thank you all for just sharing your genius and being generous of spirit and mind, to open yourselves up to conversations like this. And you as well, Brenda. I appreciate all of you for allowing this to happen.
Thank
I did all
you.
that. Thank you very much. This was a
Amen
joy.
again.
And I had a wonderful time. And it's always good hearing everyone, but always good listening to Tom, who babysat me years ago. Now you'll get the joke. But it was I give jokes at the end, not at the beginning. It was a pleasure. Thank you very, very much. And Sid, if you're still on, please contact me as soon as possible.
Absolutely.
And I'm excited about what everyone is doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Have an excellent weekend.
Creative.
Yes,
Thank
indeed.
you.
I hate you, Gary Ace. Only because I love you. Ciao, y'all. Thank you, everybody.